Welcome to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Let's take a look at some of the interesting conversations of the day. Now, it seems to me that everyone is talking about the Haze. So we have news now that Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad is going to be writing to Indonesia's President, Jokowi, about the cross-border haze. Now, I don't know about you, Sharaad, but I think that the frustration over the haze has been made even worse this week by Indonesia's officials disputing reports that the smoke was coming from their country. So everyone's a little bit more tense from the haze.
Yeah, and I think it's also a question, Melissa, about the question of the effects that we have. And I think people are unsure about the long-term effects that the haze has on our bodies, for instance, on our health. I think we all are developing probably a sore throat at this point. I know it's affecting my chest. But the issue of the long-term effects, I think that is perhaps something that's not been quite worked out yet. And I think, we look to medical professionals and research in medicine and public health to help to kind of define what those problems are. Because if you look around, most people are going outside unprotected.
Right. Okay. So my question is, has the haze changed anything about our daily routine? Have we changed our routine? Have we limited our outdoor activities? For the large part, most of us are not able to limit our outdoor activities. We still have to go out and work and take public transport. But I also am wondering about the sentiment this year, whether there's a sense of increased frustration. Have you noticed that? Because, the haze is almost a yearly occurrence. You should be used to this by now.
Yeah, I think there's part resignation and there's also part frustration and anger, but it doesn't seem that more intense this year around than it has. What I think people are resigned about, perhaps, is that there seems to be a lot of intergovernmental talk. We've had ASEAN-level, mechanisms talked about. We've heard about meetings coming together, so on and so forth. But what has really changed on the ground, or at least in the air, when it comes to the problem of the haze?
Well, one of the things I have to say, when it comes to the sentiment about haze, really has to do with communication, right? So how well or effectively the government is communicating to people about, the air quality index, about, school closures, for instance, perhaps improving transparency in public access when it comes to data on forest land use area. All those things will actually help when it comes to the public sentiment when dealing with haze. There's only so much we can do and put the mask on, but having improved communication from the government, I think will do a lot to temper some of the sentiment.
Right. And I guess, it does seem at the end of the day that there's a need to find a sweet spot between creating public hysteria or, or panic, and actually doing little in terms of giving that information. So you need to kind of calibrate that information giving, I think, in a way that gets people informed and gets them to make the right choices about themselves and their families without necessarily starting off a panic.
So no kind of fear-mongering, right? There's another piece of news that I found interesting today, Sharaad. De facto law minister today, Liew Wee Kiong, he said that a report by the National Human Rights Commission, or better known as Suhakam, will be debated during the next Dewan Rakyat sitting. This is going to be on October 7th. And this is interesting because this is the first time a Suhakam report will be tabled and debated. And this is despite Suhakam submitting a report almost every year for the past 19 years.
Yeah, there's so much in this story, Melissa, and it's partly to do with the changing relationship between Parliament and the executive. We see other initiatives to make sure that Parliament has responsibilities. We're looking forward to a time when some major public appointments are going to be made by Parliament. For instance, the Parliament is going to be strengthened and empowered vis-a-vis the executive that's been very strong all these last 5 decades. So that's that in the mix. I had on the show.
You had Gerald Joseph,
yes,
right,
on the show yesterday. Yeah. And Gerald came as a representative of Suhakam, and we look back at the 20 years. Suhakam was established on the 9th of September 1999, and
so it's 20 years. Nine,
absolutely.
Beautiful.
And it's really interesting to note, if you remember that time, I know you were very young then, 20 years ago, but there was a lot of skepticism about Suhakam as an institution. The first person to lead it was Musa Hitam, somebody, of course, very much part of the establishment, the political establishment of the country, and because he also had questions around his role in the troubles in Baling, for instance. So there was a lot of talk that this was going to be a whitewash. But Suhakam has gone on such a long way over the years.
No,
yes, and I think part of it is that it has adhered to the Paris Principles, which
What is the Paris Principles?
Well, Paris Principles basically set out how a National Human Rights Commission should be formed, conducted, its independence, and it actually does, and something I learned yesterday, it rates national human rights commissions across the world. So you can get A, B, or C rating.
So what is Suhakam's
well, it's an A. I believe it's an A. But there was a
wonderful.
point in which it might have been downgraded to a B.
Because of its lack of effectiveness?
And there were other issues at that point in time, but it finally kind of scraped through with an A. The important thing is that, you know, as Malaysia aspires to being a global player, it will have to make sure that it keeps up with the best practices.
Yeah, so you know how you said that Suhakam has come a long way in the past 20 years? I guess I'm wondering, because, you know, part of Suhakam's mandate is to promote awareness and to provide education relating to human rights. Now, I'm wondering, just 20 years after that, has the needle moved as much in terms of the understanding of what Suhakam is for, in the understanding of human rights, or is this mainly an urban conversation?
Well, you know, I mean, Gerald's position, very interesting, is that everybody has an intuitive sense of what it is to have rights and what it is to be a human being, and those natural sense of rights that people kind of in a common sense way develop, right? So the issue is enhancing that. And I'm actually looking forward to the debate in Parliament to see if parliamentarians themselves understand human rights discourse, some of the principles, you know, that go by, you know, sometimes polysyllabic words like intersectionality. I mean, I'm looking forward to a time where parliamentarians are going to have to debate this, and in terms that I think congruent with the global discourse on human rights.
Okay, so not just the public's understanding of this, but MP's understanding
of...
not
just your, you know, Kedai Kopi coffee shop kind of take on issues, but really a deeper understanding of human rights.
Wonderful. All right, so the other story, there's also an interesting opinion piece today in the papers by Tan Sri Munir Majid, who's a member of the Economic Action Council. Now, what he put forth was that he suggested that the Pakatan Harapan government appoint an economic spokesman, because the explanation on current economic issues has not been clear or consistent. And I say spokesman, I mean spokesperson, man or woman.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I must say, because I was very taken by this opinion piece, which I think really kind of focuses on some key problems that this government has had. Munir is very balanced, I think, in his assessment of what's going on with regard to Pakatan Harapan and its policies.
Well, there's a quote that he wrote in the opinion piece that we thought was particularly interesting, wasn't it? It was in response to this, he said there's a communication gap, which is a big hole in the Pakatan Harapan government, which is tearing into it. Now, there is an increasing loss of confidence in Pakatan Harapan as a result. So Pakatan Harapan must act to communicate to the people regularly and with clarity. And I thought that was beautifully put.
Yeah, he was very articulate, I think, in narrowing down some of the issues. That he even talked about maybe failures, the failure to explain why the removal of GST and the substitution with the sales and service taxes had not resulted in lower prices. And that is maybe a gap in some of the communications that has come out from the Pakatan Harapan government. But he goes on to say also that perhaps in the early days of the government, there was a tendency to overemphasize the fiscal crisis or tensions or pressures the government was under, and not sort of give a much more balanced picture. He's, of course, also counselling not just the government, but also other stakeholders, including businesses, saying that businesses cannot rely on what used to be the way business was conducted under the Barisan Nasional, because, of course, we know of all the downsides of those practices. He's saying that today they have to learn to change. And he says, he goes, if business people cannot adjust to change, they should not be in business. And if a government cannot manage change, it will not long be in government.
Very good, well put. And I have to say, though, I mean, this is interesting, right? The suggestion to appoint an economic spokesperson. What would this spokesperson do? I mean, I would love to have more, clearer and consistent communication coming out from Pakatan Harapan's economic agenda. They're doing work, but I want to know exactly what work they're doing and how they're doing it. And a kind of a consistent messaging would be wonderful coming out from the Pakatan Harapan camp.
Yeah,
the question is how
they're going to do it.
How they're going to do this?
Yes,
yes.
And it seems to suggest also that this should not be based on a ministry, right? It should be an overall statement coming out of government, which would mean it's interministerial. It would mean aligning all the different ministries and a focus on the question of the economic life of this country.
Right.
And I think Munir perhaps understands, as many leaders have, that the economic story is the most compelling narrative.
Correct.
That keeps governments in power and keeps them responsive to the ground.
So what do you think makes for a good spokesperson, Sharaad, a good government spokesperson in terms of talking about what it is the government is working on and has achieved? I mean, so much so that people don't dismiss it as propaganda. What do you think makes a good spokesperson?
Well, I think it's honesty, and I think Munir also points to the flap over the the issue of the poverty level and the basket of goods issue. And all these, he's saying many of these problems were not created by the Pakatan Harapan government, but they have to deal with it. Right. And they have to deal with it in a fashion that communicates that they're honest and they're sincere about resolving the problem, rather than being defensive. Remember, some of the early responses to the issue of poverty
was very defensive.
Was very defensive, and I think that was a big mistake. So again, having a spokesman will mean having a thoughtful response to communications as a strategy of government, not simply as a byproduct of government.
All right, after this, we're going to turn our attention to the legacy of B.J. Habibie. Stay tuned to consider this.